What's up everyone and welcome back. Today we're going down under to take a look at some little known Australian serial killers. Australia is known as a place where just about everything wants to kill you, but if you manage to survive the poisonous snakes, spiders, and angry wildlife, you might just run into one of Australia's many serial killers. Bandali Michael Debs is an Australian serial killer currently serving 4 consecutive terms of life imprisonment for the murder of 2 Victoria police officers in August 1998, and also the 1997 murder of a teenager, Christy Hardy. Debs was detained at HM Prison Barwon in Victoria. On the 12th of December 2011, he was convicted of the April 1995 shooting murder of the New South Wales prostitute Donna Ann Hicks. Debs, from Nair Warren, a southeastern suburb of Melbourne, was employed as a tiler and had fathered 5 children. Further adding to the sinister speculation about Debs, his youngest son Joseph was mysteriously found dead due to a suspected drug overdose at a house in Greensboro in December of 2003. In February 2003, Debs was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment with no minimum term for the murders of 2 Victoria police officers, Sergeant Gary Silk and Senior Constable Rodney Miller, at Moorabbin, Victoria, on the 16th of August 1998. His accomplice, Jason Joseph Roberts, who was 22 at the time of sentencing, was also convicted of the police murders and sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years. 2 years into his prison term, on June 20th, 2005, police charged Debs with the murder of troubled teenager Christy Mary Hardy, who was murdered at Upper Beaconsfield on the 17th of June 1997. Hardy was soliciting for sex along the Princes Highway when she met with Debs. The pair drove to a secluded bush track in Upper Beaconsfield where they had unprotected sex. Hardy was later murdered. Her semi-naked body was later found lying face down by bushwalkers. A single gunshot wound was discovered at the rear of her head. DNA tests ran on the body of Hardy were linked to Debs. In May 2007, Debs was convicted of the murder of Hardy and sentenced to a 3rd consecutive life term. In sentencing Debs, Justice Kay, the judge presiding over the case, remarked, "Your murder of Miss Hardy was entirely senseless, needless, and wanton. The evidence discloses beyond any doubt that this was not a case of sexual encounter in which, in the heat of the moment, feelings or passions may have led to a spontaneous and irrational act of violence. Rather, and quite to the contrary, this was most clearly a callous, craven, and senseless murder in cold blood of an entirely innocent, defenseless, and vulnerable young woman. The evidence leads to the inevitable conclusion that you murdered Christy Hardy for no other reason than for the sheer sake of it." Whilst in prison, Debs has undertaken psychology, life skills, and computer training, and is employed as a prison carpet cleaner. On the 30th of September 2008, Melbourne detectives interviewed Debs and raided his previous address as a part of a murder investigation into the killing of a 33-year-old Sydney mother, Donna Ann Hicks. Hicks was shot dead in April 1995 in an unsolved murder. Debs has been linked to the case through DNA analysis. Edward Joseph Leonsky was a United States Army soldier during World War II, and he was also a serial killer responsible for the strangling murders of 3 women in Melbourne, Australia. Leonsky was known as both the brownout strangler, given Melbourne's wartime status of keeping low lighting, and also as the singing strangler, due to his self-confessed motive for the killings being a twisted fascination with female voices, especially when they were singing. And he had claimed to kill women to get at their voices. Born in New York, Leonsky grew up in an abusive, alcoholic family, and one of his brothers was committed to a mental institution. He was called up for the US Army in February of 1941 and arrived in Melbourne on February 2, 1942, where he would soon begin a violent killing spree. On May 3, 1942, Ivy Violet McLeod, age 40, was found dead in Albert Park, Melbourne. She had been beaten and strangled. and because she had been found to be in possession of her purse, it was evident that robbery was not the motive. Just 6 days later, 31-year-old Pauline Thompson was strangled to death after a night out. She was last seen in the company of a young man who was described as having an American accent. Gladys Hosking, age 40, was the next victim, murdered on May 18th while walking late at night near Melbourne University. Soon after, a witness said that on the night of the killing, a disheveled American man had approached him asking for directions, seemingly out of breath and covered with mud. This description matched the individual that Pauline Thompson was seen with on the night of her murder, as well as the descriptions given by several women who had survived recent attack. These survivors and other witnesses were able to pick 23-year-old Edward Leonsky out of a lineup of American servicemen who were stationed in the city during World War II. A private in the 52nd Signal Battalion, Leonsky was arrested and charged with 3 murders. Leonsky confessed to the crimes and was convicted and sentenced to death at a United States Army court. Ivan Robert Marco Milat is a serial killer who murdered several tourists and hitchhikers in the 1990s in New South Wales, Australia. The killings were dubbed the Backpacker Murders by the press. Milat is currently serving a life sentence for the murder of 7 hitchhikers, several of whom were international backpackers. In September 1992, the bodies of British tourists Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark were found buried in an area known as Executioner's Drop. Then, the following year in October, 2 more bodies were discovered along the same stretch of the remote Belanglo State Forest. The bodies were identified as those of 19-year-old James Gibson and Deborah Everest, also 19. Both had gone missing in 1989. It then became apparent that a serial killer had been responsible for all of these murders. On November 1st the same year, a 5th body was found, identified through dental records as Simone Schmidl, a 20-year-old German national who had vanished in January 1991. More than 300 police officers conducted a search of the area on November 4th and found 2 more skeletons, identified as the remains of 21-year-old Gabor Kurt Neusbauer and his 20-year-old girlfriend Anja Suzanne Habschied, German tourists who had vanished 2 years previously. Gruesomely, Habschied had been decapitated. Police revealed that all the victims had been killed by multiple stab wounds. Forensic examinations of evidence gathered at the scene revealed cartridges from a .22 caliber Ruger rifle near Clark's body. These were tested against cartridges that had been taken from a farmhouse outside Sydney. A possible 8th victim was provisionally added to the list in November. When police conducted a further examination of unsolved murders, they turned up the name of Diane Panaccio, a 29-year-old mother whose body had been found in bushland in 1991. She had been stabbed to death, and the body had been placed face down with hands placed behind her back near a fallen tree, as had those of the previous victims. A triangular canopy of sticks had been built over the bodies and covered with ferns. It wasn't until the end of February 1994 that there was a breakthrough in the investigation. A 20-year-old woman stated to police that while backpacking in January 1990 in New South Wales, she was offered a lift, which she had accepted. While in the vehicle, the driver had started to behave strangely, and she got out of the vehicle and ran into the Belanglo State Forest. As she ran, the driver fired shots at her, but missed. Soon, a second witness, British tourist Paul Onions, told police that in 1990 he accepted a lift from a driver in the same area, who then produced a gun from the glove compartment of the vehicle. As he ran, the driver fired shots at him. Onions was able to identify the driver and the vehicle from police photographs. In May of 1994, police carried out dawn raids on 7 properties, taking 3 men into custody. One of these men was 49-year-old Ivan Milat, who was charged with armed robbery and discharging a firearm. He was later to be charged with the murders. Another was Milat's brother, Walter. During the raids, police found a .22 caliber rifle that matched the type used in the backpacker murders. Ivan Milat appeared in court for the initial robbery and weapons charges on May 23rd. He did not enter a plea. On May 30th, following continued police investigations, Milat was also charged with the murders of 7 backpackers. At the beginning of February 1995, Milat was remanded into custody until June that same year. In March 1996, the trial finally opened, and in July, he received 7 life sentences, 1 for each of his victims. As always, thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, comment, and share the video. Stay safe out there.